Welcome to the Level One Walkthrough Podcast. I'm your host, Tony, along with my co-host, Rob, Big Boss. What's up, man?
How's it going, brother?
Oh, man, it is going well. We got a treat for you guys this week. Apologize for us not being able to be on having a regular podcast last Friday. However, we got a real special one for you guys. We have a special guest that's going to be premiering on this podcast. It's Steven Danton from 2 Ton Studios, which is a game that you and I had been talking about, and we've been in communication with him. He's a game designer, animator. He did everything, the programming, along with his wife Sarah. They did a lot of the arts, the programming as well. So just the two of them, and also another person that was part of the sound design that created this really, really unique game. Had the fortunate time to be able to have him on, and he talked more into the actual game, and it was such a great time that we spent with him.
Yeah, it was awesome. He gave us a lot of insight on this game, and we could have definitely talked to him for a lot longer than we did. We pushed him a little bit. He was said 90 minutes. We almost got to 2.
He was a trooper.
Yeah.
I mean, to be fair, we did warn him. We did tell him that, we have a tendency to do that ourselves. We're like, okay, we're just doing an hour and a half, and we're talking for like 2.5 hours.
Yeah,
so
it's hard. I remember texting him like, all right, we got to respect his time. We can't
can't
go over.
So
but then we're like,
okay,
one more question, sir. Let me get you one more.
Well, we had to end it on a good whim, and especially the last question that kind of tailed all that in was just great, because I was so curious on like how that one specific thing that we wanted.
Oh,
so,
yeah, don't tell. Let them
No,
listen.
no.
Yes.
So for everybody, if you have not checked out this game, it is available pretty much everywhere.
Buy it now.
Yeah, buy it now. It's a game called Unto the End by 2 Ton Studios. It's by 2 people that designed the game. They took 4 years to be able to actually develop it, so they dedicated their time and their effort, and it was such a great experience to be able to talk, because it's not only getting a person that can be able to make games like that, but also be able to express like the love and passion that they have for these games, and why it's just so important to just try just these new things. Like, I just found this game out of nowhere on the Nintendo eShop, and look at what happened. It's so great that we even had that moment where I could have easily changed the actual, I would have played something else or skipped past it, but I saw it grabbed everything that I needed. That trailer did everything it needed, and it sold me on that, and I was so glad that I did.
It's almost like it was destiny.
There you go. You're starting with the puns already.
Yeah. Pew pew.
Well, we don't want to keep everybody on suspense for this, but we're just going to go ahead and jump you guys right into the actual podcast. But feel free to be able to follow him at 2 Ton Studios. You could be able to find him on Twitter. We'll have the links below. And if you do want to check out the game, feel free to, and be able to. At some point, we'll be streaming, and that's one thing we actually kind of did talk about. So look forward to that. But like I said, check out the game. We'd highly recommend it. And guys and girls, enjoy.
Enjoy.
Today we have Steven Danton at 2 Ton Studios. And thank you so much for coming on and being able to talk about your game, Unto the End. We're really excited to be able to have you. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. My pleasure, guys. Really excited to chat about the game. I heard your podcasts, the 2 different parts, where I don't know which one of you kind of found the game first, but it was interesting hearing you describe it to the other one, and just I'm always happy to chat about games and kind of talk about what we've been doing and our inspiration and stuff. So looking forward to it.
That's great. Yeah, I had told Rob about it. I found it on the Switch through the eShop, and cool. I was looking for specific games that were kind of like giving a little bit more of a challenge, kind of. Not necessarily roguelike games, but I was kind of looking for ones that are kind of similar towards like anything that's reminiscent towards any of the From Software games. Something that gives you a little bit more of a challenge. And that one was just one that I saw. And when I saw the video for it, and I saw that you had the ability to parry by by high attacks and low attacks, I was like, I'm sold. I have not seen anything like that, and I loved it. And even the trailer, it showed that one where you could be able to cut one dude's head off, and I was like, I'm done.
Nice.
Yeah, it was great. As soon as he told me about that, I was just super curious about it, and I was like, I think that night that I ended up downloading it, and it was one of those things where it's very just straight. Like, it's not a game where you see very often, which I think I've mentioned before, where we kind of like games that, you know, don't really like hold your hand. So it was one of those things where there's not a lot of HUD or like, you know, things where it's telling you exactly what to do, and you're kind of like learning as you go. So I thought that was a really cool thing about the game. A lot of the combat, even in the trailer, I'm like, just like you said, where you cut the guy's head off, I was like, oh fuck, this is really cool.
That's great to hear, guys. Yeah, like the whole idea of not holding your hand and, you know, letting you kind of figure things out on your own really was inspired by, well, those are the games Sarah and I grew up with, right? So we kind of grew up in the Sega, NES, you know, the Master System, Genesis, NES and SNES days. And those games were, for a bunch of reasons, more about kind of you get a game and you'd figure it out, right? And I kind of, it's interesting when I was a kid, you know, I'd be playing a game and I would actually say to my brother or my friends, like, oh, I haven't figured this one out yet. And nowadays when I watch players, it's more like, oh, the game hasn't taught me how to play, or hasn't like shown me what do I do next. Like they're kind of expecting like the, you know, the quest tracker or the beam of light in the distance or something like that. And that's cool. You know, like that it's great that it opens up games to a lot, you know, more people, and people don't get confused, but it also takes, for me, and Sarah, a little bit of the magic away from games, that sense of wonder and figuring things out on your own and accomplishing things on your own. So we really wanted to try and capture that in Under the End. And also we felt it made sense for the story, that you're this, you know, father that's got some skills as a warrior. You fall into this effectively old temple, and, you know, you're lost. You don't have a map. You don't know where the heck you really are. There's these creatures that are around you. You've never seen these creatures before. You don't know anything about them. You're in way over your head. You know, you're scared, you're alone, you're overmatched. And we wanted the player to feel that way too, because, you know, ultimately that's what games let you do, right? Games let you feel things because you're interacting with them in a way that's I think much more raw and authentic than, say, a movie or a book, where you're consuming the experience of another, you know, a character on screen or a character in a book. You're not actually interacting with it. And so those are the kind of games that Sarah and I enjoyed playing growing up, and definitely wanted Under the End to be like that.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, we, like Rob and I, we both grew up with those type of games, especially from the original Nintendo. All that great time frame within the games, they were so challenging. And like the ones that I always think of when I think of like original Nintendo games is like Ninja Gaiden. I have yet to finish any of those three games. I've never been able to run through it, and then each iteration is different, where they take away the continues after a certain point, so you have to start all the way back. And that one was just so challenging. And like games like that, I always think back to, because I'm like, even after 30 some odd years, those games are still like mocking me and telling me that I'm not good enough to win.
Yeah.
I love that kind of stuff. Is that kind of how you guys? Because I know that you had mentioned with your wife Sarah, was with the two of you making that game, were both of you kind of, you know, taken in by video games from an early childhood? Is that kind of how this kind of came about, with like the passion for getting, not only playing games but moving that into an actual career?
I think for me, more than Sarah. Sarah definitely grew up playing games. You know, her dad still is a pretty big gamer, and
that's cool.
That was kind of rare back when we were kids, for our parents to be gamers. But Sarah's dad was into games, and so as a kid, she grew up playing a lot of games on her, like, you know, her old Macintosh and Commodore and those kind of things. Then, of course, you know, on the NES, playing a lot of Mario. I played games throughout, you know, kind of ever since I can remember. The first game system I had was a Texas Instrument 99, which was like really a computer that was kind of like a computer plus a ColecoVision, kind of like it was kind of.
Oh,
I don't know
wow.
if you,
Okay.
it came with a keyboard, and it had like an old school like Atari style joystick with like one button on it. So it was like the
Mm-hmm.
first thing I ever played games on. Man, I must have been like 5 or 6. And then my brother is also into games. He actually works as a concept artist in games. He's a
That's
concept artist
awesome.
on Gears of War. Actually, not too far from you guys up in Vancouver. There's the Gears of War the art side of Gears of War is out of Vancouver.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So yeah, we always grew up playing games, and I always wanted to make games. Kind of as I played more and more, I started thinking a lot more about how they're made and how I would make them better. Then rather than kind of wanting to play them, which I think is an important transition if you're wanting to make games, because it is different to make a game than to play games. You start kind of scrutinize. It's like anyone who makes film or whatever music. You start almost like analyzing the experiences in a game or movie or film or whatever, rather than playing it so much. You're trying to figure out how they captured this emotion, or what mechanics they're using here, or what rendering techniques, or whatever. So yeah, I think I've always wanted to make games. I don't know if there was a specific tipping point. Like there's that one magical game that I was like, oh, this is the time to start making them or start thinking about them. Yeah, I don't know. I know there was this one game. I think it was called The Ninja. It was a Sega Master System game. It wasn't very good, but for some reason, me and my brother Greg and our friend Casey would spend a lot of time during this one summer, like coming up with new ideas for the Ninja and scribbling them down on graph paper and planning stuff. And I don't know where any of that stuff went, but maybe that was the first time I really thought about like designing games, I guess.
Wow. Yeah, I can imagine, like, now that you've seen, you're kind of like gone behind the actual looking glass. You can see like all the things. You can't not turn that off. And
Right.
especially for you playing these games, and especially your family being so heavily involved in games, that's so awesome. Because for myself, I was just basically the odd one. I was the one that always played games and still kept playing games even now to this day. It's one of those things that I couldn't let go, and I've been trying to get myself as an individual, trying to actually develop my own game that I've been concepting for quite some time.
Oh, cool.
And the time that I've been dedicating into it is just kind of like, it's so demanding, and it just requires you to put so much focus in what you're doing, and you have to lay out everything and know everything before you start actually putting those pieces together, kind of like building a foundation of a house. So I found it to be it's so gratifying to have things that work when they do work and they're supposed to, as opposed to the ones that don't, and you're just like pulling your hair out, and you're just like, I don't know what I'm doing, and you kind of have to step away. So, but I was like the odd one in when I was a kid. I mainly played a lot of games at home, and then played arcade games. A lot of my competitiveness drives from that. Rob didn't play that much arcades, but he played a lot of games too when he was a kid as well.
Yeah, I grew up with the Atari NES, and went up from there. Not so much the arcade portion, but yeah, I mean, it takes a certain kind of individual, I think, because I went to school for like about a year and a half to 2 years in like video game development, because I was always intrigued by it, and I was always into video games, so I'm like, all right, let me try this out, because I feel like I'm gonna regret it if I don't. So I ended up trying it, and man, like I did okay, but I could see people, that were in the same class, just like miles and miles, like, excuse me, ahead of me. And I couldn't do it. I felt like at the very least I tried, and I would have regretted it if I didn't give that a chance. But at the same time, it takes a certain individual to keep pushing through, because I could see like bugs in there and lines of code where I was just like, I can't. I really can't do this.
Yeah, it's making games it brings together a lot of different disciplines, right? There's kind of this design aspect, there's a systemic thinking aspect, there's storytelling, there's kind of the nuts and bolts of production in terms of just rendering art and animating and laying out levels, and then there's AI. There's a lot of things that have to go kind of right and be brought together. Yeah, it's It's demanding, definitely. A lot of Sarah and I definitely worked incredibly hard on Under the End. Spent a lot of late nights on it. Very much was our only focus for, definitely the home stretch. Was very taxing, very demanding. So.
Yeah, I had heard through the one of the interviews that you've actually talked about that it took about 4 years to actually develop.
Yeah, that's
I
right.
was like, wow. And in that 4 years between the two of you, did you guys find yourselves like in a challenge where you're just like, okay, we're at this point, we need to be here. I'm sure you guys had to kind of like negotiate like where you guys are between the two, because you're both doing one thing and then kind of like passing it between both of you, kind of like doing that collaboration between the two of you.
Yeah, and we also shared the way Sarah and I work is not maybe how other studios work, where someone's the artist and someone's the programmer, and then like once the art is done and the programmer integrates it, maybe the artist touches it up or something. We kind of would work back and forth. Like we both are really artists, and then I kind of forced myself to learn how to program, and force myself to learn how to do animation. So, yeah, I would like sometimes I would start an area and like rough it all out, and then Sarah would come in and kind of edit it, and then she would add some things that I would take it and kind of do some polish on it, and then Sarah would do another pass of polish, and so it's very iterative in that regard. There are definitely times where it's like, wow, what the heck are we doing, or this is too much, or it's too little, or it's not fun. But the thing to remember is everyone goes through that. So even the best studios, like I think Playdead, the guys who do Inside and Limbo,
Yeah.
They're definitely at the top of their game, top of the game, I guess you could say. And they in a GDC talk, they admitted very openly that they throw away about 70% of the work they do, not just concepts, but coded, ready to ship, more or less, like beta level, I guess you'd say, content.
Wow.
Damn.
And you just have to do it. Like there's it's kind of always funny, like people who haven't made games, and I've run across a lot of people that are in the industry, but aren't actually like haven't made games before. They have some association with the industry, and they don't appreciate that, because games are interactive design spaces, with many kind of vectors of interaction for any any encounter or any action a player can do or an enemy can do. It's just incredibly hard to do it only on paper and get it right. You can even get it right for you and your team, but not for the masses. And then you have to decide, like, of all the players, like who is your target really?
Right.
And
right.
you can't listen to every opinion, because then you'll make a game for nobody. And you have to be you have to have a lot of self-confidence to and belief, really, almost blind belief, to say, no, like these people get it and they understand it and they enjoy it, and they're the kind of people we're making the game for, and these maybe aren't the kind of people. And so there's definitely that balancing act of believing in yourself, knowing when to throw stuff away, getting it out to enough people, getting the feedback, listening to some feedback, not listening to other feedback, knowing when to, when to iterate, when to say enough is enough, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, it's a challenge, but fun in the same regard.
It sounds like you have to have like a multitude of like hats that you have to wear, because you're not only doing, I know that you came more from an art background and started doing the programming along, like with your wife as well. She did more of the arts as well, put it all together. But it's like you had to learn that on the fly while you were doing it. So I mean, that's
Right.
that's even more of a challenge. And then the end result of the game is that you still listen to those things that you were doing from the beginning and saying, okay, I'm not going to pull these into the game. I'm not going to give the player more hold handing. I'm not going to give them indicators when they need to pick stuff up, because you're going to pull all those things away. And it's such a wide variety of restrictions that you put in that, and that's the way you wanted it. And I would imagine like other studios would have to have those conversations, say, okay, we need this specifically here because people are getting lost in here. Like the fact that you were able to take some of that feedback and say, okay, I can change it in such a way, but I'm still keeping it my own, and you don't lose that creative drive that you were doing with the game from the very beginning to the very end. Like it doesn't get lost. It's quite an accomplishment, especially for the two of you.
Thanks, appreciate that.
Yeah, I was going to mention, since you were talking about how you were kind of like focusing on a certain audience, especially with the way that the gameplay is in this game, where you're not over explaining things. It's kind of interesting because we're, in, I guess, any kind of space or genre of whatever you're doing, you kind of, you don't want to do what everybody else is doing. Because you want to be unique, but at the same time it's like there's a lot of people that like certain types of games or music or whatever, and I feel like we're kind of getting it in the pod and in this podcast specifically, where we're trying to do stuff that's different that not everybody else does. And it's one of those things where, I don't know if you were worried at all where you were, making this game, like, is someone gonna understand this, is this gonna be for them, kind of, was that ever in the back of your mind when it came to this?
Oh yeah, I mean, we're always thinking about how to give just enough guidance, but we kind of made a decision early on. I mean, to take a step back, there is a ton of guidance in Under the End. It's just unconventional given modern games,
Yeah,
right?
it
So
is.
there, for example, the first lesson you learn in the game is that you can drop your sword and how to pick it up, right?
Mhm.
You fall through the hole, you land on the snow, you're introduced to the main enemy type, and then you drop your sword when you land, and then a prompt comes up and says, pick it up. So you pick up your sword. So then you find a door, and you know that you can't get through that door. Most people go right because it's going to have games that are side scroller kind of have been designed forever. So most of the time you go right.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Then you come left, you come to that barrier, and you have to attack that barrier low and high, or you can shoulder charge it. But most players don't. They hit the face buttons first, not the triggers. So they attack low and then they attack high. So at least they learn there's two different attacks. Now most players think that it's a light attack and heavy attack because of Dark Souls, but now they've learned, you can drop your sword, how to pick things up, and how to attack. And then also you drop your torch. So you've learned, okay, when I attack, I drop my torch, and I can't see in the dark, so I better take care of that torch. So in the first like 2 minutes of the game, we've taught all of the like core the things you're going to be doing the most, right? You're going to be like moving around, you're going to be jumping on ledges, you're going to be attacking things, and
Mhm.
you're going to have to move through the world. So we did all that with very little pop-ups and explanation and all that kind of stuff. And to me, I mean, I can tell you like with great confidence that's harder to do than just displaying a bunch of text pop-ups for the player. But we
Oh
think
yeah.
it's better because it's more immersive, right? So we uh, I'm not jaded about this at all, but I think there's a misconception that good design. No, I'm not saying you're saying this, Rob. I'm just saying like in the industry at large, like there's a
Right.
misconception that good design means like spamming the player with tips and help and overlays and all that kind of stuff. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't I push back on that. I don't think that's good design. I think that's a form of design, but
Mhm.
I think that it is immersion breaking design. And
Mm-hmm.
if there's one trend I'd like to see go away in AAA games, it's leaning on that kind of design because I don't think that's it almost makes the game into like a to-do list where I'm like trying to go from one set piece to the next. I'm not really
Mm-hmm.
playing the game anymore. I'm waiting for that next instruction to tell me how to play the game, and that's a
Right.
different experience than frankly I think games should be about. So yeah, pretty early on we rejected and pushed against that idea. Definitely, same with dialogue. Like we didn't want too much. We didn't want text kind of between the characters. Very similar to say Another World or Out of This World or Flashback, older games. But then more modern games like Inside or Limbo or Below, if you played Below. So yeah, those
Mhm.
are pretty conscious decisions early on, and then we kind of add things and remove them. Like we used to have an indicator that you could pick up a thing. Like we had this little sparkly kind of little animation that would be around like loot that you could pick up on the ground or on a character.
Mm-hmm.
And then we realized like it's useful, but then all you're doing is you're going from one loot kind of thing to the next. You're not really feeling like, hey, I'm in this little cave area or I'm in this whatever little kind of nook, and I'm gonna press the LB button because I see a little bone or a stick or a basket on the ground. Um, and to us, that's more powerful because it's you as the player making that. It's a little leap off a little like ledge, if you will, mentally, but you're making that decision,
Mhm.
and like all those things were done really to say to you like, hey, focus on the world. We're not going to help you. Like figure out how to beat these enemies, get past these traps, pay attention to every little detail. It all matters. And if you do, you have a higher chance of success. So like all of that is kind of teaching. And then what we're trying to do, which is what, to be honest, old school game design was all about, like Metroid and all these games. Like they were trying to give you the tools so you would succeed. They weren't trying to make the game hard. So anyway, I don't know, you know, that was our thinking, and we stuck to it, because for the people we made it for, the people that tend to enjoy games that are about observation, you know, don't overly handheld, et cetera, they enjoy it more. And so that kind of was the decision we made early on.
Yeah, and I would agree with that, because it kind of, because of the way that you design this game, is it brings back that old school feeling and that old magical feeling where, you know, you get with your buddy and you're like, have you done this or that? And you're like, no, I didn't do that. You know, and you kind of start understanding some of the mechanics a little bit more and more, but you're identifying things that it doesn't show you in a text, because then your buddy would have, you know, noticed that or found that out. So you're able to kind of like have that conversation and be like, did you try this? No, I didn't try that. And that kind of brings more life to the game, if that makes sense, because it's not beaten over the head. And that's one of the things that we're kind of into, is those types of games where it doesn't handhold and it doesn't, you know, put all this stuff in the HUD and you know, all this text box is just, you know, you're kind of figuring it out as you go. And I feel like that's to your point, it's kind of getting lost, you know, in games nowadays, and especially in the AAA space. It's like I'm starting to notice that now as you're talking about it. You're like, yeah, these games do that, where, you know, it's like you're checking off a list, and it's just one of those things where I feel like, you know, your game is special in that way, where, you know, I wish you kind of got pulled back into that old school, you know, way of doing things.
Right. Yeah, I appreciate you saying that too. Like that was one of the things Sarah and I talked about when we were kids. You know, you'd ride your BMX bike down the street to your buddy's house. You'd be talking about Mario or whatever, and that's how you kind of like figured stuff out. You know, they're like, oh, I did this and I got to World 4 or whatever, and that is like, what? And then you go home and you want to do it. You know, and like that's
right.
That's, I don't know, to me, that's what games are all about. But I appreciate, you know, like people play games for all sorts of reasons now. And I think that's great too. And I think we need all sorts of games. I think that, you know, that's fantastic that games can cater to so many people. But yeah, definitely Sarah and I made a game for a certain audience. So great to hear that you guys enjoyed it.
Yeah, once I played the game, I started to like the part that you actually did listen to, where I was kind of specifically talking about the game, what my experience. I started to feel the actual environment kind of closing in on me, and I like the idea that when you're going through the cave system, where you lose your character because the cave is kind of blocking you. And it's like in the foreground, so like you can't see yourself and you keep going. So there's times when you kind of get like a little claustrophobic, and I was nervous playing the game, and I don't experience that very often, because even times when I'd finish a battle, the fact that you guys put in your character after he takes a couple of hits and actually take down the enemy, he falls to his knees and he's exhausted. And I started to feel that, and I'm like, how often do you actually feel something like that with a game so early? And you learn about these things, about this world, just, you know, on bits and pieces of experiences that you have. But the fact that you feel what this character is going through, and also on top of that, because of what happens to him, you also set it in a winter time. So not only is it brutal for the character, but the environment is also against him. So you're putting all these things against the player, and you feel all those things. And it's just something I haven't experienced in a game like that, and especially for the two of you making that. It's so incredible that you guys had that ability to say, this is what we want, this is how we want to present the actual game, and the end result speaks for itself. I haven't experienced anything like that, and I really do. I pay attention to that just because I love those kind of experiences. I love that it doesn't hold your hand. It gives you all the necessary tools necessary, and it teaches you all those things if you pay attention to it, instead of, oh, here's your checkpoint, go here. And it's like, I don't need that. I'd rather have the screen completely empty and I can just be immersed completely in the game, and that's what I felt. And after about 2 hours in, I knew that this was going to be a game that I want to continue, because it was challenging too. It's it put that competitive drive in me again, telling me, hey, are you good enough to beat this game? Because it's going to be tough for you, and you have to pay attention to the way the combat is, which a lot of games don't do. They don't do that kind of that parry combat the way that you guys set it up, where it's up or down. And I love that you guys even put in that mechanic as well. It works so well with the game.
Well, thanks a lot. I really appreciate all that. Yeah, it was a lot of work, but it was a lot of fun, and we made it for guys like you, right? Like that's why we made it, and
that's awesome.
It's awesome to hear that you really enjoyed it. That's very much, that's why we make games, right? We it's like any art. You can ask any artist, and they all always tell you, like, don't try. You can't make everyone happy. Don't even bother. And so we kind of took that advice on board pretty early on and stuck to our guns.
What I found fascinating was one of the interviews that you did. I saw on YouTube. It was by Shaq News, I think it was, and you were talking about how the mechanics for the fighting portion of it was based and inspired by Punch-Out.
Yeah, absolutely.
And as soon as I heard that after playing the game, I'm like, I can't turn that part off. Where that's all I see now.
Yeah.
And Tony wanted to mention, was this the original Punch-Out or was it the Mike Tyson's Super Nintendo version?
No, so I played the original NES one. Where Mike Tyson was the last boss, and then I played the other ones here and there, and then I played the Wii version, which is more recent.
Yeah.
And I think the Wii version is probably the best version. It's a little more polished, very similar to the original NES one in terms of like all pretty much the same cast of characters. It actually did a really good job of faithfully like recreating Glass Joe and Von Kaiser and all those guys. And like, King Hippo still has exactly the same like hidden pattern where you got to like punch him in the belly and stuff. Yeah. And, so that's all there. So those two like versions, the middle ones, I don't know. They kind of messed around with stamina a bit in the middle one, and they kind of changed the speed of it a bit, and I didn't like them as much. But yeah, the old NES one and I guess the original NES one, and then the newer Wii one.
Now, have you actually been able to beat Mike Tyson's Punch-Out?
I've never beaten the real Mike Tyson. The farthest I ever made it was Super Macho Man. Like I can get all the way through the NES version, like beating Soda Pop is incredibly hard. I can beat him,
right?
And then Bald Bull is crazy hard. If you mess up that, this bull charge, you're toast. But so I can get all the way. But as a kid, I never finished the original one. It was like you'd hear about a guy like in a different neighborhood who like beat Mike Tyson, but never actually see him. Like that's how hard Mike Tyson was. The Wii version, I played like, I wore that thing out. Like I played that all the way through many times. That is a cool mechanic where you play through it once and you play through everyone again as a title defense, and they're all like upgraded. So like Glass Joe has like headgear on, so he's like way harder to knock down. And then like King Hippo has like I think a sewer grate like over his belly, so you can't like hit him in the stomach. And
what?
And then it has like an unlockable hidden like end boss. I won't spoil it for anyone, but there's like a special end boss that isn't really even a boxer. But that one's hard too, like in its own way. But I think the original Mike Tyson's Punch-Out has to be one of the hardest games ever. Like that, it's crazy hard, that last guy.
Yeah, he hits you once and that's it. If you even get up to him, which I've never seen, I've never been able to get there, and I just heard he hits you once and you're done.
Yeah,
that's it.
Yeah.
Well, the cool thing about the Switch is like, and no, this is almost like blasphemy, but even just messing around with those old school games, like I'm playing Super Metroid for the first time. I actually never beat it, so I'm playing that, and then what is it? So the Super Nintendo version of Punch-Out I'm playing, but on the Switch it's awesome because you can kind of just go back like a minute or 30 seconds from prior to, let's say, your death, and then you can kind of start over and refresh. So it kind of like helps you out push through some of these old, hard, difficult games and then kind of reset without having to start over like we did when we were kids, right? Because that's what I saw my brother do all the time, where we would, play certain games and he would sit there for an hour, get to a certain point and die, and then he would be like, all right, I guess I'm starting over. I'm like, are you insane?
Yeah, it was. I recently played the original Punch-Out, the NES Punch-Out, at a buddy's house, and his son is now getting a game, so he wanted to play it. And like they give you a code, right? They give you write it down.
Yeah.
Like you get to like, I don't know, or someone like Piston Honda or something, and you lose, and then they give you a code, and then you can jump back to that code, or you can just do it all over again.
Right.
Yeah.
It was they were definitely hardcore back in the day. Yeah.
I do find that it's, even though the inspiration came from a game like that, and also I know that Limbo is another one that you guys have drawn a lot of the art style and the way the way the game flows. But with Punch-Out, even though that game is so challenging, you still modeled most of the actual, or the idea, the concept of the mechanics. But it's also a game that you haven't beaten. Like, how interesting is that? It's like it speaks it speaks to like how difficult those games were, and especially like Ninja Gaiden. I've never beat any of those, so I love those games. And like Cyber Shadow is like a game that's kind of reminiscent towards Ninja Gaiden, and I know that you had mentioned that you had actually talked about that and playing that game, and I love that it brings those things back, because some characters that they put into that game are kind of like a nod to Ninja Gaiden, and I love that they did that, and it's still a very challenging game with this one too, so very difficult.
Yeah, it's cool. Punch-Out was an interesting inspiration. I mean, Punch-Out, when you study Punch-Out, they have a lot of things that make it. I mean, first off, it's boxing, so it's a lot different. The characters are one-on-one. You can't move. Mm-hmm. But what we really tried to borrow was this kind of read-react system from Punch-Out. Mm-hmm. So it's like, an enemy kind of winds up high or winds up low, and then you take the appropriate guard. And then we kind of did away with Punch-Out has a very strict stamina system in terms of like a health bar. Like Little Mac has kind of a number of hearts, depending on how they visualize it. Some of it is a bar, some of it is hearts. Mm-hmm. And then when you run out of those, you're exhausted, and then you have to do a dodge to recover, which actually, if you look at Dark Souls, like Dark Souls mechanics are they're really stealing from Punch-Out. So like, they also have the read react, but they kind of make it easier because you can roll all over the place. But mm-hmm. So we wanted to take that like read react system from Punch-Out, and then we wanted to kind of overlay like the 2D-ness to it. And the fact that you can move around, right? Like you can jump up and climb things. You can pick up things and throw them. You can use friendly fire to kind of take enemies out. So making kind of like Punch-Out, and it's kind of like an action movie in a way, where like not action like super fast action, mm-hmm. but that the battles kind of like can emerge kind of in this dynamic way where. Like you drop your sword, but then you get it back, and you kind of beat the enemies back, and then you grab your, a knife and throw it, and like, I don't know, when it clicks like that, when the fights kind of have that like comeback kind of feel, mm-hmm. then like to us, it's really working correctly, and that's why we put in all those things. Like, you can throw a dagger and an enemy can duck, and then like enemies can throw like weapons and they can hit each other, and you can like drop your sword, but then you can get it back, and so. There's all these moments where you can kind of have this emergent kind of improv style gameplay, mm-hmm. Which to us just felt really cool. It felt like you're in this battle, you're kind of clawing your way through it, and you're never really out of it. You can always kind of get back in it, even though it might feel kind of hopeless for a bit. So.
Yeah, I think it was just so satisfying watching. It was one of the clips I watched where the main character threw the knife, cut this guy, and then it just feels so gratifying when you actually accomplish something like that. And it's such a a gameplay mechanic that you don't really see very often, in that sense, where you're just kind of doing everything, throwing this like throw the kitchen sink almost at the whole all these enemies. And granted, there's a couple at a time that you're facing, or a few at a time that you're facing, but it just feels so much more epic when you do end up throwing that knife at the guy, he dies, and then you cut this guy's head off. It's just really, really gratifying to see that.
Well, thanks, appreciate that.
Yeah, the challenge with something like that, because the game is actually, a lot of it takes place when you're underground in the caves, when you kind of go back and forth. with the decision of having the torch when you're doing the attack and your torch falls, I love that it creates a little bit of a challenge for yourself too, because you can veer away from that if you want to in the midst of the battle, but you also can't see really what's going on. So you want to keep yourself in place to where your torch is. And sometimes I would find myself holding onto the torch and try to just keep myself in the best position and then attack, and then I know that it drops. So the fact that it even does that, you're creating another little thing in the game that's making the player actually have to do a lot of critical thinking, because if you take away the torch, then it's like, okay, well, now you can't see, so good luck trying to be able to beat this person. And
Right.
and that's just another thing. And it makes sense, because if you're doing the high attacks, you have to use both your hands, and of course logically it would make sense that you would have to drop something, like what they did with in Rockstar with Max Payne, when they brought that back, Max Payne 3. The character actually had to hold, if you wanted a rifle or like an assault rifle, he had to hold it with both hands. You can't
Right.
hold a rifle and a shotgun in both hands and use them both at the same time. Like, he would hold the shotgun in one hand and a pistol in another, and if you want to use the bigger one, he'd have to drop something. And the fact that they even put that in there, along with like you guys only having restrictions with the player, is very refreshing, and I love the challenges in that.
Yeah, we actually the interesting one of the things that we spent a heck of a lot of energy on was trying to. I mean, in general, with the game, the important thing is to set expectations in the player's mind as to what they can and cannot do, and what they can expect, and whether it's fast or slow or whatever. So, we tried to do that one under the end. Like, for example, dropping the torch originally came out from kind of this motivation to discourage rolling and encourage blocking. If you're rolling all the time, then you're. We felt like as a kind of a middle-aged guy around the same age as me, like rolling in a swords fight is kind of nuts. Like, it's pretty hard to do, and you
Right.
probably would get killed after kind of coming out of the roll, and if you didn't like hurt your back or twist a knee or something. So we want to kind of like discourage that. And one of the ways to do that is to, with the torch, make it so you need to be close, to that torch in order to see things.
Mm-hmm.
And then kind of like encouraging the up and down parry and the countering and stuff. But like and exactly what you're saying too about this idea of like positioning matters. Like, when we thought of Unto the End, we kind of landed on like 3 different pillars for the design. So it's like high, low, left, right, and seeing behind you. And so the left right thing is very much the torch thing, right? Like, just if I'm getting in a fight with someone, if you ever listen to like the old senseis or whatever, the sword fight guys in movies, they're always like, pick your spot, like fight in your spot,
Right.
like make sure you have the right ground. You don't just like attack anywhere. And so similarly, like the foreground in certain fights is there and kind of like boxes you in. And if you kind of retreat too much, you'll get occluded by that foreground.
Mm-hmm.
And so that also is part of like kind of encouraging you to position, care about where you engage, all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I appreciate you noticing.
Yeah, I kind of had to reset myself because, coming from, Demon Souls and playing that relatively recently and kind of going on and off, I noticed where I try to keep rolling and then it was like not the same in a sense to kind of get away. You kind of were, forced to block a lot. And it's weird because, in Demon Souls and Dark Souls, they're like encouraging the roll, or they call the skinny
Right.
roll or the fat roll if you're being really slow. And I always would rather block. And it was interesting because now I started getting used to rolling, and then I go into this game and it encourages more
Right.
blocking. So it was just an interesting dynamic to see the two, and then me constantly dying.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, Jesus. But another thing I saw, which I wanted to mention with regards to the controls, because I don't know if it was like maybe the Steam version of the game, but there was like a graphic that popped up. It's better to play with the controller. And I've noticed playing on Switch, I don't know if it's my Joy-Cons or whatever it is, because I don't know. I end up playing better with like my PlayStation, or if I have my Pro controller with me, because I'm just so used to the way that the controllers feel. So I kind of always default to that. It's nice to play in bed with the Switch because it's more portable, but I just
Right.
never really liked the Nintendo like controllers, Joy-Cons in a sense. But was that like more so, pushing people to go to the controller as opposed to like maybe mouse and keyboard or something?
I just think that it definitely depends on your familiarity with either one. Like, I mean, if you are a real keyboard shark, then that's probably easier for you. Uh, we tried to map things from a design perspective onto the controller. Like, like X on an Xbox controller at least is lower than the Y, and so like there's a kind of a there's a direct mapping in space from your controller and a little bit in your mind to high and low. And so then we tried to make it so that the actions you use the most are on the face buttons, and then the auxiliary ones are on kind of the triggers and the bumpers. And then for me, like switching guard high low with the left stick or the D-pad is just it's more natural than W and S. I find.
Yeah.
And so yeah, we and then how you like how you switch targets. Like you can switch targets with right stick. You can and we kind of took the lock-on system from Dark Souls of pressing in our the right stick to draw and sheath your sword, which also actually locks on and or disables lock on. So we tried to take some of that stuff, and to us, it just felt the game. It just feels better with a controller, but it's also personal preference. Like I also like playing games with a controller if they're the kind of games. Like if I'm going to play an RTS or something, I definitely would prefer to play with a keyboard and mouse. But
right.
with kind of more actiony games, I think a controller. I don't know to put on my like super designery hat. It's like a purpose-built. It's a purpose-built device, right? Like,
right.
Like I could cut open a can like with an axe, but it's not meant for that. Like I'd better use a can opener. So maybe that's too extreme of an analogy, but like a controller's meant to play these kind of games, and so that's what we tried to design it around. I also agree with you, though. I just want to say on the Joy-Cons, I do find them. Yeah, like the Pro controller is really the only way I play Nintendo Switch games. The Joy-Cons are too. Maybe my hands are too big, or I don't know what it is. They just don't feel. Like they don't feel like industrial strength, if that makes sense. They don't feel like they don't feel professional. Like they're not heavy enough. The sticks are wobbly and stuff. I don't know. Yeah.
And it's also the buttons are very, very small.
Yes,
too.
Exactly.
So like I always felt an issue, especially I think it was on what was it? The PSP. It was very small too. So it kind of takes time to get used to it. I mean, obviously for the portability factor and certain types of games, like you said, it's great. But there's certain games where I'm just like, I need the controller.
Yeah, I couldn't. I tried doing that. I played the entire game, not until just recently, all in the handheld mode for the Switch. So the Joy-Cons, I didn't. The ones that came along with it, I ended up replacing them with the Nintendo ones that they actually have by a third party.
Oh, nice.
And those ones actually give you more of a beefier like handle, so you can be able to hold it in a more comfortable way. So it gives you more spacing. And I played the entire game that way, and I'm already in my third playthrough, which is interesting that you've already you're tripping me up with stuff because there's more new experiences that I'm having with this third playthrough, and also too like I for some reason I'm not one to like jump into like the controller like the overlay and like see what your directions are and like what your indicators are for the actual controller and everything, like what you can use and everything. I like to just experience it myself.
Sure.
But then I looked at that and I saw that you actually have it in there where you can hold the left trigger down and use your attack, and it's like a fake. Like you can fake out your attack to kind of maybe get the enemy to maybe make a secondary decision on what attack they want to use. And I experienced that. I'm like, I didn't even know that. I played the game already twice going through it, and I didn't even know that. But obviously, if I would have read the directions of the layout, I would have seen that. But I think the fact that there's more to it with the combat that's in there, I didn't even realize. And you can also kick snow with your feet, which I didn't know you can do.
Yeah, I had no idea.
Yeah, we designed a lot of that around this concept of like, which was really from Punch-Out too. It's like this mastery kind of curve. Like that's why we put 3 endings in it. That's why we have kind of like the old warrior mode that unlocks after 3 run-throughs.
Right.
And that's why we have like faking and kick snow and all this kind of stuff. That as you play through it, you kind of gain a fluency. The hope is you gain a fluency with it where initially you're either rolling a lot and playing like Dark Souls and you're trying to like get hits and you can win that way, or you're kind of like forcing your mind around this block counter riposte kind of model. But you tend to play very defensively for the first run through, most players. And then you kind of like go there again. You're like, okay, I kind of get it. And then you start like ducking and countering, or jumping and countering, or like, start faking and using shoulder and mixing in like a melee stab. So by the time you get to like your third run through, you're kind of like ready to take on like that permadeath challenge. So that was the whole, that's what like my brother and I like loved about, and Sarah too, like loved about Punch Out. Like Punch Out, you're playing through, and the first time you're really quite nervous because you can die so easily and you're playing very defensive. And then once you play a bit, you get to like Don Flamenco or whatever, and you can like take that guy out with just like low left right hooks if you time them right, like from full health to zero, right? And then you realize like, oh, Von Kaiser like does this little head shake, and whenever he does that, you can like hit him and get a star punch. And so you have this like mastery over Punch Out, but it's kind of earned after playing it many, many times. So we tried to capture that kind of thing.
Wow, that's so cool. I mean, were you with your brother? Were you guys like tossing ideas back and forth while you were putting all that together? Because even like the shoulder dash, that's something you really don't see, especially in a 2D type of 2D 3. It's like a type 2.5 with the game, but you don't see anything like that. And the fact that you have characters behind you, I love that you have to be aware of where you're doing. And then even when you throw a little curveball at the player, like if you try to do a shoulder dash to them, they actually counter by going around you. You're like, oh, you little shit, you have you're making a decision what I'm doing. I'm like, okay. And then you just make sure you can be able to just either throw your dagger or like if you have a spear, just throw that. And when you impale him, when you hit him, it's so gratifying. Like, all right, I got that one, and now I just have to deal with the other. I love that the character does, like when he moves from one side to another, your player will actually turn his head and actually pay attention to someone behind you, which the idea of having someone behind you is a real cool thing because they'll counter you. I mean, they'll just close in on you if you allow it to. And I did. I played that way by rolling a lot because I was afraid because I'm by myself.
Of course.
And then when I got the actual my confidence with the game and got familiar with how they're doing, I found myself anticipating their attack a lot faster, and then I can be able to get to them. But it is extremely still challenging even now because the third run through, which you said it's called the warrior mode.
Old warrior. I don't know if you did a restart every time, but the third time you run through, you're basically like a gray-haired guy.
Yeah, I did want to mention that. Is that because it's just the game is just showing that it's grueling on the player and like he's getting older and it's just taking everything from him? Because I noticed that. I thought there was something wrong with my character, and I'm like, no, he's like gray now, like because I'm in my third playthrough. Where did that even come from?
Well, I mean, it ties into the story, so I don't want to say anything. Maybe when you finish it, there's a different ending in that mode.
Okay.
But, it definitely. I mean, I'm happy to spoil it if you're interested, but I don't want to preemptively spoil it.
I'd rather be able to be. I'd rather know like once I play through it because I want to. That's a challenge in its own, and even like the Yetis that you encounter, especially now in this mode, that if I die, I go right back to the beginning.
Right.
I have to be so aware of like what I'm doing, and especially those other characters that kind of look like I don't know what they are. Like this big tall guys that are white that they have their hands behind their backs. Like they're kind of like they seem like they're kind of like I don't know. It reminded me of like from Pulp Fiction, the Gimp, where it's just all that black character.
Sure.
It's like I'm not sure exactly like what that enemy is, but that guy, the one that has a staff, that one is the worst.
Yeah, fuck
that guy's the worst.
He's the worst.
So those guys are woad monks. So the creatures
monks
that you encounter in the forest, you first face them in the spear, the fight where the guy throws the spear. So those guys are woad, and there's two clans, like the forest and the mountain woad are basically fighting each other. And the guys that you encounter that kind of have the lanterns and are kind of lighter in color and have their, like the woad kind of have these manes of hair, and the monks shave those off, and they also cut off their weapon arm, so they only have one arm, and they're kind of like old warriors that have kind of reached this level where they're like, no, I'm going to stop fighting, and instead I'm going to dedicate myself to peace. And so they cut off their arm kind of as an act of fealty, and they swear to kind of like keep the peace between these mountain and forest woads. And of course, like any peacekeeping force, they don't always succeed, but that's kind of who they are. They're very honorific, and they're kind of these warriors that fight, but only when they need to, and so
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of the idea behind them. Going back to your other question about like the shoulder charge and the enemies going behind you and stuff, like Sarah and I spent a ton of time talking about that. Originally we had a kick, like the guy would be able to do like a kind of 300 Spartan kind of kick, and
Okay.
It ended up not feeling like it felt too athletic, and also not powerful enough. Like that was something we always tried to balance. Like the father, he's got to be skilled. Like he can't feel like a total klutz, but
Mm-hmm.
he can't be too skillful because like ultimately we kind of were going for the little Mac vibe, the you're a father kind of vibe, and the way you succeed is by kind of grinding through it and struggling through it and kind of mastering the nuances of the father as a player. And so we changed the kick out for a shoulder, which is it's kind of more gruff and it's less technically it's got less finesse to it and stuff. So that kind of landed better, I think. And then the idea of circling, like that was all kind of born from those three principles of like, okay, well, if you're in a lot of enemy games, 2D games will just like line up a bunch of enemies and then you'll like chop them down, or they'll do the trick of like spawning an enemy behind you, and then he comes kind of, and we do that sometimes too, but spawn an enemy behind you and he kind of like comes at you from the other side and you're playing a little bit of King of the Hill, but for the most part, enemies they're not smart enough to know about like circling and surrounding. But we built out the combat over like 18 months. The first bit was just combat, and one of the big things was like, hey, well, I mean, like if two guys are coming at you, like smart creatures would surround you. Of course they would. And there's rules for like if the guy can throw projectiles, then he doesn't try and surround you. He tries to stay behind the guy who can protect them, and like there's kind of different layers to the AI that we worked on, but all of it was based on that kind of those three principles of like high, low, left, right, and seeing behind you. So
I found it like really interesting that it again, like we were talking about, it doesn't hold your hand, it doesn't tell you and explain everything, but you have all these types of kind of like backstories of these like enemies or people in the game. I did want to ask about whether if it was a feature, an item, or a weapon, or anything like that. Is there anything that you wanted to get into this game that you just didn't have the time to?
I mean, there's always lots of ideas that you have along the way, and definitely the throwing away 70% of the work, like the Play Dead guys, is definitely a thing. I don't know if there's anything that we really kind of wanted to have in that we didn't have. Like we thought about having different weapons. We thought about allowing you to carry more spears, and some of those are implemented, but then we just dialed them back because they were either unbalanced or it didn't. Like the reason we didn't do more weapons was we wanted the player to feel one, like back in the day, like most warriors had a sword that was handed down by their family through their family lineage. Like, your sword was your father's sword and so on and so forth. And, you learned how to use that sword. Like, unless you were a trained professional warrior, you really didn't know how to fight with any other weapons. Like, sure, you could probably pick up a spear and like, keep a bear out of your house or something, but you weren't like a trained spear fighter as well as like a mace fighter, as well as an axe wielder, as well as a swordsman. And so we kind of tried to double down on that idea to really sell the concept of like, well, you're a father that's got some warrior skills, but it's really the player that's got to master those skills. Likewise with the armor, right? Like the armor is pretty rudimentary. It's probably what any of us could make if we were stranded in the wilderness, like bones and leather kind of strapped to us. And so that was also to say like, yeah, it's cool. It's super cool in Dark Souls when you find like different armor, Demon Souls, whatever, different weapons, but it's also not ridiculous, right? Like there's no way a normal warrior, unless you're like magical, could learn and use all these different weapons,
right?
Or incredibly skilled. And so that kind of like would have thrown off the narrative for us. I'm trying to think of other things we thought about. At one point we thought a lot about having the I don't know if you guys have seen it, but there's a hidden dream that you can find. It's a nighttime scene. It's featured actually in one of the trailers we did. And then in the sparring practice where you kind of have that memory of home and you learn by dueling against your wife. In the background of your house is a dog, and it's pretty hard to see, but it's wagging its tail and it's kind of laying in the grass. And then you see that dog again in the other dream, and it's much closer and sitting by a campfire, which you and your family are sitting by eating dinner. And that we thought a lot about having that dog, that wolf kind of dog feature in the gameplay as kind of a companion that would help you out and kind of was built into some stories. you'd have to like rescue it and kind of stuff. But we ended up not doing that because it would have kind of taken the game in a different direction, and then instead made it your family pet.
Right.
So I'd say that was probably the biggest one that we thought like, oh, that would have been cool. What else? We did think about having different dream sequences. Like every time you rested a fire, we did think for a while that when you healed your wounds, you would pass out and wake up in a dream.
Yeah.
And that dream would represent like whether you were scared or whether you're like excited to see your family, and it would kind of be influenced by some of the decisions you'd made along the way. But we ended up cutting those just because they're just too much work to do all that and still keep
Right.
the game kind of tight. So
I did feel that it was more of a kind of like a memory when you used
absolutely
when
it
you
is,
used the bond when I used the campfire for the first time, and then I saw that there was a little thing that I can learn about my sparring, and I was like, oh, that's cool. And then it felt like I was
Yeah.
actually just doing like I was like relapsing a memory, playing
Yeah.
out these trainings, whereas it's an elegant way to be able to show the player like, hey, these are the combat, but it's also integrated into the game where it feels natural. It doesn't feel like once again, it's not like forcing you, it's not holding your hand. It's like we're thinking of all like the fact that the placing all these things together and woven it into this world, into this game is really, that's really the biggest thing about why we found such a big love for this game, is because of those little things. Like when I did that and started doing the combat, I started thinking, I'm like, this feels like a memory. And then when I got up, I grabbed my sword, and then I felt like I was on this journey again. I thought maybe there would have been different like memories that I would have encountered with each of the actual campsites. I thought that I would have something like that, but there's a lot of little things in that game that I had noticed. I really do like the idea of when you rest, you put you just get down on your knees, and you just put your sword falls, or you just put it down, and you're just exhausted. You give out that exhale of just like, oh shit, am I home yet?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's really, that's where I felt like where I felt more nervous in the game, because of those little things. You can hear your character breathing, and there's also a language that you also don't explain what that is, but you also have to illustrate that language by nonverbals. The characters will extend their hand out, which is a natural thing to, hey, give me this, or you can do offerings. And even just that, the offerings itself, like I'm curious on that alone. Like when you place that actual offerings in there as a way to, it's more of world building, and also that you can decide if you want to attack everybody, or if you want to be very passive and kind of, get away from everybody. With that, just the giving of exchanging of items, where did that come from? Like, what kind of inspiration pulled from that, or was that something organic that happened within the game?
Yeah, I think it definitely was organic. I'm trying to think of like how that came to be. Way early on, we kind of had sketches of ideas where you would come across situations like, this might sound weird, but if you've ever seen the movie Willow, which is an older movie,
Yeah.
Warwick Davis and Val Kilmer. So there's one scene in Willow where Warwick Davis and his kind of troop comes across Mad Mortigan, and Mad Mortigan's like in a cage, and this army goes by, and everyone's like, leave him, he's a criminal and stuff. And Willow decides to free Mad Mortigan,
Right.
and that becomes like a good decision, and then Mad Mortigan helps him and stuff. And so like we wanted to have those kind of moments throughout the game where you could kind of like, you could decide to leave Mad Mortigan, or you could help
Right.
him, and then that might have different consequences. So that was kind of where the idea started from. And then I think after, it became a little bit more motivated by first contact. So an analogy we'd often use is like, we're out hiking, and which we'd often do up in Canada, and really everywhere we go, we love hiking. And imagine you come across a bear or a wolf.
Oh, geez.
And they just cross your path. Like, what do you do, right? Do you run? Do you throw something at it? Do you stand still? Do you try and offer it food? Like, how do you actually communicate with a creature that you can't talk
Right.
to? So how would you deal with that? And isn't that an interesting thing to think about? And so we kind of like use that as a model to say, okay, you fell into a cave, and now you come across these creatures that it's their home. Like, what do? Do you run in and kill them? Do you try to like give them something? Maybe they give you something back. and just kind of try to repeat that as a model in different settings and situations, and taking into consideration like not every bear is the same, right? Like, not every human's the same, and so that's why some of the creatures are more interested in trading, and others see you more as a threat, mostly because they're scared and they attack because they don't know anything else. Some of them are a little more deceptive and cunning, and they'll set up little ambushes for you. And so we kind of wanted to have that variety because I guess to us, like, that makes creatures feel intelligent, and that, really moving through a real world that is in flight regardless of whether you're playing.
Right.
Like, that was another big thing. It's like this whole world would work even if the father wasn't going through it. That was kind of what we wanted to have happen.
Wow. Okay.
And the father, that, like, from the beginning of the game, so I was always curious, like, so he's leaving his family, and what was he exactly doing? Was he going on a hunt, or
he goes out hunting, and we kind of, it's pretty subtle, but during the opening, I guess, credits, the thing that says it's game by Two Ton Studios and who the publishers and stuff, there's an audio track in the background that is kind of like of the father stalking through the snow, and then there's like a sound of a deer running away, and so the idea is during that black period, the period where you're just looking at kind of credits, that's kind of like where the father's journeying, and then he kind of pursues this one deer a little bit too far into the mountains, leads him too far astray, but then he crosses that, then it opens up, he crosses that bridge, it falls down, and now he's kind of stuck, so he keeps going, and then he falls into this temple where he's kind of like way out of his depth. And so that was the idea. Like, he's just, he's off hunting. That was actually motivated by a movie called Happy People. I don't know if you guys have seen that.
No,
I
don't think so.
It's a documentary film about I think he's a fur trapper, a Russian fur trapper. And every year he goes to hunt in the north for about 6 months out of the year. And, he leaves his family and lives in a cabin all by himself. And it just actually talks about how happy he is and how happy his family is, because they have this real sense of purpose, and their life is not distracted by all these things. But anyway, that was kind of the motivation for that. It's like the father, as often men did back in those days, would go out hunting, and they'd be gone for quite a long time. And then they'd hopefully come back with some food or furs or whatever. So that was kind of like the loose inspiration for that.
Okay. Yeah, I saw that the first time when that happened, I thought it was your son, and I know that you had mentioned that in when people have actually specifically asked about if that's your son or not, and you mentioned that it's a daughter, and I'm like, oh, that's right. I mean, one of those things that you assume that it's going to be naturally a son because of the way that the character is, the world that it is. It's kind of more of a masculine type of thing where the men take on a stronger role. But then the fact that you, instead of switching that, you just said, no, it's going to be his daughter. And even when you're doing the sparring things, when you open up the inventory, you see little items that are in there. And that's where I saw that little kind of like handcrafted little dolls, like those things that you carry with you. And the fact that you even have the little lock of hair as a way is being able to see it. Like, you can actually hold it when you kind of. I kind of did that too, like to offer it to kind of see like what would happen, because the items that I get, I'd had to experiment with like how they would work with different enemies. And especially the big worm thing that you encounter at the very end,
right?
That one, I was confused, and I'm like, why do I keep dying? Like, I just fall to my knees, and I'm like, did I have like a heart attack? Because like I saw this big monster, and I've never seen anything like that, and I just fall over. But I found myself, like, it gives you a moment to be able to pull up your item, and I'm like, oh, maybe I have to show them something, and by doing that, I learned the process of getting past that. I don't know. Can you actually fight that worm or whatever it is?
No, that whole area. We at one point had the worm as a fight, but then we kind of, which is often the case, to kind of hold true to a vision. It was like, there's no way that this guy, an average warrior, could beat this like ancient creature. That's like I don't know what like Samwise Gamgee fighting a dragon or something, right? There's just no way like that would be possible. And so we took that out, and instead we made the whole area really after the elder, where you there's the elder guy and there's the other monk, and you fight those guys, and then you take the lift down. ever like after that, all the way through those tunnels is really one big like kind of navigational puzzle. And so that's kind of how we thought of it in that way, and didn't make it about fighting.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, the way that happens is just the idea that you have these little items and you have to kind of play around with them, because some of them actually do give you something different. I had noticed when I had done my first offering with one of the other, like they would be like trolls, right? Or like ghouls.
The three-eyed guys are called Krilt.
Krilts.
And they're like loosely inspired by Jawas from Star Wars.
Okay, yeah, we got a little bit of that, especially with the Yeti, and we do want to talk about that because I love what you did with the second Yeti that you have. I have so many questions with that because I've never seen anything like that, especially with the weapon that it chooses to use. But when I had done the offering for the first time, when I encountered that one that's above, like up on the like a little bit on the hill, and it's kind of navigating me to tell me, hey, put an offering or give us something. After I did that, I decided, I'm like, well, I'm just going to take them down because my resources are necessary. I don't know what what I can be able to get from them. So I was just kind of just going through everything. And I had noticed, I'm like, oh no, I have to fight 3 of them. And I'm like, oh, right. I bit off more than I can chew. And I'm like, well, now I'm screwed. So I had to make a decision after that because I had died, and then said, okay, do I need to do this or not? Because I got closer to the enemy when I had my sword out, and they saw that as a threat. And I'm like, oh, I need to put my sword up and then give them the offering. It's just those little things in there are just they put it in the game. You put it in the game where it makes sense, and that's the things that I enjoyed the most out of it. It's just these little moments within the game.
I really appreciate that. Actually, that whole encounter is one of the richest encounters in the game, but also one of the our favorite ones to design. Where I don't know if you noticed in the background, there's a couple jars, but there's 4 noticeable jars, and they have leather, sticks, and bones in them, but not herbs. So that's kind of a hint as to what they want most.
Oh no, I didn't see that.
And then the gesturing part, those guys are definitely over leveled, like in power and skill for your point in the game. And so it's a very hard thing in games to get people not to fight. Actually, famously in the first Dark Souls, like the big demon you fight in the beginning.
Oh, yeah.
Like it takes a long time for people to realize they can run through the door. That's it's kind of ingrained into players. So we tried to add that stuff like stop you, he points to the table, the other guy stops you, points to the thing. But you can also choose to kind of go about it different ways. Like you can offer items and then leave. You can offer herbs and get the light stone and then leave. You can offer things, get the light stone, then kill everyone. You can kill everyone, steal the light stone. So there's like 4 or 5 different ways through that thing. And that was kind of like one of the first, not only one of the richer ones, but it's one of the first ones we did, which really like set the table for all the other things you can do in the game, where there's these different ways to get past every single fight.
Wow,
that's interesting.
Yeah, through the interviews that we had listened to, and actually when I started, because I have a tendency whenever I play a game, and Rob does the same. With like when we get a game, we kind of get in, especially something that we haven't heard of. We kind of find out like more about the actual game and like more about people that were behind it and set it all up and got it all together. And once I started to see where the inspirations came from and the things that you were talking about, I really saw it. I'm like, wow, it's such a cool thing, because with just 2 people being able to do this, as well as I know that you have someone that did the sound design.
Absolutely.
and there's other people obviously with the acting as well. There's a whole bunch of other people, but within the core of the 3 of you to be able to do that, it's such a challenge to put yourself into a 4-year time frame and be able to execute it, and also be on the other side of it, where I know that you have your experience with Microsoft, where you were there for quite some time, and now moving into your own. When you had shifted over to that from working within a big gaming space with a big company or corporation, when you moved into for yourself, did you notice a dramatic difference in how much creative control you have? Because it's really you and Sarah's voice between what you want. Did you find that was really empowering for yourselves, or is it just you wanted to make the game? You had this idea, and you guys had this idea, and you wanted to make it.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely empowering, but it's also daunting and can be overwhelming, because when you're in a big company, one one, you can focus on smaller stuff and go really deep on certain things, but you also have like a ton of people you can bounce ideas off of. You have managers and then managers, and you have your peers, and you have people that are like more junior than you. And so I don't want to say it's like harder to mess up. You can definitely mess up at a big corporation, but you have a lot of checks and balances that kind of help steer you in the right direction. And then if it doesn't go well, it's not all on you, right? It's like, well, 8 of us talked about this and everyone had their opinion and we went with this decision. And so it's kind of like success and failure is distributed, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
When you're on your own, you have a ton of freedom, but it's interesting. Like Sarah does a great job of definitely on Untitled in general, of like keeping us kind of like going in the right direction. Like I tend to like throw out tons of ideas, and Sarah's got a lot of great ideas too. But like I tend to throw out a lot of ideas, and Sarah helps prune those ideas back. And I think that is a really essential balance to have if you're going to make games, especially with a small team. You need people that you trust, unconditionally, that will check your ideas, because you can very easily like spin out and make a game that like is going to take you 20 years to finish and never get done, right? And so it helps to have like that honest feedback, and Sarah definitely provided that. I would overall, it's definitely empowering, but there's a healthy dose of fear and doubt and feeling overwhelmed throughout the process, that you just have to like accept. I don't think in life there's very few like overwhelmingly positive things. Like everything has some negatives, and you kind of have to decide like what you as a person want to maximize more, because there's always things that are going to be challenging and frustrating and maybe suboptimal. So
going off of what you were talking about as far as like the development process, I know everybody's kind of different, but I'm sure you've hit like brick walls before where you're just like, I can't figure this out, or which kind of route you want to go to. What kind of like helped you move past that? Because I know some people just need to like take a walk or listen to something or just kind of do something else. What was your kind of go-to?
Yeah, that's a good one, actually. It's kind of different aspects to that. So there's the burnout aspect where you are working so much, you just kind of stop being able to think terribly well. And you can kind of get run down. Like there's definitely points where you almost feel like you're getting a cold. Like you don't actually have a cold, but you kind of start feeling like that. Like you really feel achy and kind of like sneezy and stuff. It's kind of weird.
Wow.
And the best thing for that is like, Sarah and I find just getting out in nature, like, going out for a hike, getting out, maybe if Sarah and I are in California now, so getting out to the coast and, sitting by the ocean, or when we were in Washington, get out to the forest, get out to a coast, I guess, as well, but, get out to one of the big forests out there and just kind of take in stuff that isn't digital, tends to really help. What else do we do? A lot of different techniques, like journaling. A lot of writers do that, comedians as well. Like every day they'll journal, and that kind of like, but do it like write with a pen. Like don't write on the computer. I guess you could write with a pencil too, but like actually physically write stuff down. Just kind of helps like break the pattern of always being at a computer. But midway through, like I got a sit-stand desk, which actually really helps. So you're not sitting all day long. You can kind of raise it up and stand. So those kind of for the fatigue side of things can help. In terms of ideas, I find like for me, sketching is kind of like the way to kind of get away. Like I just like, if I'm stuck on something or I can't kind of figure out a really cool, something that really feels like kind of, when you have a good idea and you're like, yeah, that's going to feel great. To kind of break the kind of, I guess, creative writer's block, people would call it. I normally just go outside, sit on the porch kind of thing, and just like with a sketchbook and just sketch out ideas, and that tends to like unblock it. For me, I find like talking helps, like really just talking out ideas. So Sarah's very, like after 4 years, Sarah's like, sick and tired of hearing all the myriad of ideas. Like, what if we did this? What if we did that? Now, hold on a second. And she's very different than me. Like she's very, she's more quiet and will just like sit with something and then like go onto the computer and mock it up. She doesn't like, for her, like talking things out is actually not helpful. And so that's like, I have to make like, so I'll end up like calling my brother or something and just talking his ear off about it, or a friend or something. So I don't know if there's any great like super secret recipe, but I do think giving yourself time, watching a good movie or playing another game can kind of just like distract your mind a bit, and then let you kind of get the energy to push forward.
Yeah, I think that does makes a lot of sense to be able to like how you phrase it is just getting pulling away from things that are digital and
Yeah,
looking at real tangible things and feeling how nature is around you, hearing like the birds or
exactly.
just grabbing pieces of twigs and kind of putting stuff together. That does have a lot to it where you can just pull you need to kind of like detach yourself and unplug yourself away from all of that. And going through the process, I would imagine like it sounds like you're actually more verbal about like, hey, I want to bounce this idea, and you're just kind of talking because that's a way for you to be able to work out the problem while you're saying it. And I'm exactly the same way. Like I do that with my girlfriend. I talk a lot, and I have to like pull myself back because if I have an idea of what I'm trying to do, I'll say all the things that I'm thinking about, and then she's kind of like, "Hey, you're telling me too much." But it's like for me, it helps me, but for her, she knows how to take that stuff and kind of like cut it down and be like, "Okay, well, what do you really want to do?
Yeah, that's
You have
great.
all these things that you want to place yourself into. Where do you want to put yourself in? What do you want to start with, or
Yeah,
what do you want to put yourself into?" So she's a good way of being able to cut the fat out with everything. And for something like that, I would imagine for the two of you having to find that out while in development was a challenge. And but the two of you working together and accomplishing this, and having the time to be able to talk about the game after you finish it is just, it's got to be so satisfying because all that time, and now you get to hear about like how people are responding to the game. And whether it can be positive or negative, you kind of have to take all of it together. But it's
right.
like all that time of dedication kind of comes out to something that never could have existed, something that could have just stayed on a shelf, or just an idea that could have stayed on your computer at home or on a sketch pad. And now that it's an actual physical thing that actually has grown its own life, you get to see like, hey, this idea that I had was really good. I could see that people are really enjoying it, and all that time and dedication is definitely worth it. Even though it was hard and you had to unplug yourself away from it a lot, it shows what kind of life it's grown since then. And even that challenge alone is just got to be so satisfying now to kind of relax for a little bit, and then maybe potentially get back on future projects or what you want to do. I would imagine that you and Sarah would have some sort of ideas of where everything, all the experience that you have with this game and what you've learned, and like where you're gonna kind of maybe streamline into something else. So that's exciting. That's very exciting for the two of you.
Yeah, absolutely. It really is, and it being able to chat with guys like you and watch people play on Twitch and YouTube and stuff, that really is, it's kind of surreal in a way, especially given the era that Sarah and I grew up, playing games. So like back in the same with you guys, like back in the day, it's like you maybe like could get a magazine, that featured a game you played, but
Yeah.
often I don't think I
Right.
even found game magazines until I was quite a bit older. So it's like you went to the
Yeah.
store, you looked at the back of the box, you kind of read the description, you bought it, and then you played it for like three
Oh
months, right?
man.
And
Yep.
now it's totally different. Like not only can like the guy, not only can the people who made a game watch you play the game they just made, but it can actually have a dialogue with them, and sometimes like on Twitch, like in real time, it's like someone's experiencing the game, or like do a podcast after someone's played the game and give you like firsthand detailed kind of reaction. That's incredible. So yeah, I definitely the kind of novelty and how special that is definitely not lost on Sarah and I, and yeah, it makes all that hard work. It's really satisfying to feel that and to just to connect and chat with people about it. Absolutely.
And I know we're winding down, so I appreciate you coming on. I did want to ask one final question. I don't know if Tony has one more, but is there any question about this game that you may have not been asked that you maybe are kind of like wondering why no one picked up on a certain thing or a certain part of the story or something that you may have not have told or someone came across yet?
It's interesting. I don't know if there's been a question that hasn't been asked, but I think that's a really good one to think about. I think what we tried to do that maybe I'll give you an example. Like Jonathan Blow, after he made Braid, evidently was like depressed for a year because no one really
Yeah.
saw it in the way that they saw it as like a puzzle challenging game, and he was kind of
Right.
he was trying to say much more with it than that. And so I think what Sarah and I tried to do with Unto the End was make a game that was a commentary about combat and fighting in general in
Mm-hmm.
games. And what we tried to do was we tried to say, look, every creature you meet is territorial, and some of them are honorable, but none of them are evil. And as a human trekking through their homes, like you're the intruder. So hopefully, like act appropriately. Like sometimes you do have to fight to help the innocent and stuff like that in life. I think that's very important actually for you to stand up and fight for things. But a lot of times games kind of both trivialize and glorify really mass killing. Like even Mario is like a
Yeah.
homicidal maniac.
Yeah,
And so no one really talks about it. Everyone's like, yeah, it's just, who cares? You're just blowing aliens up or whatever. And Sarah and I wanted to kind of maybe not make a huge social statement about that, but at least put a little bit of at least be a footnote or a little bit of a comment on that in games to say like, yeah, look, as I said earlier, we spent 18 months making a fighting game. And with the most recent update, you can get through a fighting game where you don't actually have to fight at all. And yeah, I'm really proud of that. And I think that I hope more games do that from a gameplay kind of dynamism, emergent kind of thing, but also that there's more to games than just killing things. And when you kill things, like, maybe have a little bit of a think on, why you killed them and who are they, and it kind of
Mm-hmm.
enriches the experience and the storytelling and stuff. And so that I guess not many people have kind of talked about or asked us about, and that is, yeah, why we did a lot of the stuff we did. I will say one other thing, which is not related to the killing thing, but some people think we made a game like a hard game for the sake of making a hard game, and that really is not true at all. Like we made a game that is challenging, but it's not like I don't think of Unto the End as a difficult game in the sense of like every fight with the right approach can be won quite easily,
Mm-hmm.
and like you can actually skip all the fights with the right approach, and like even the last boss, like you can bring like a spear into that fight, get a spear, use a dagger, like defeat them pretty easily, or run away. Like we have combat speed settings, so we try to do a lot of stuff. Maybe it's too subtle, like I take that on, but we definitely didn't make a game like hard for the sake of hard. We made a game to give you as a player an experience that is closer to what the father struggling to get through this unknown land would really, go through.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's always a bummer that people don't see it that way, because a lot of people also incorrectly just think Dark Souls is like hard for the sake of being hard. But I think those games actually have more to them than just being hard. I think they're actually trying to teach you like different lessons about life. Like if you kind of jam your way through things and try and bash your way into things, like in real life too, you also pay the consequences. And so Dark Souls also has its own form of commentary on conflict and kind of being alone and kind of overmatched. And so we try to do something in a different way, but also kind of have a commentary on that, not just for the sake of difficulty.
yeah. I think you're absolutely right with those kind of ideas that you can give the player. You can give them all the weapons that they need, but you can also give them choices. And like in the beginning, I felt kind of like sadness for that one elder that's putting his hand out and he's like bleeding to death, and like you can give him something, and then he gives you the first key. And at first, I was like, I don't want to hurt this person when I could.
Right.
And if I do that, I actually can get something from them. So it's kind of like a thing that's like a little bit of like a morality test for the player, because some people will just play the game just like, oh, I'm just going to brutally go through everything and challenge everything, which I went through. But then when I started to actually kind of unravel more of the game, I was like, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to take on this person, or even that one person that's kind of it looks like another warrior that has his sword in the snow. I had encountered that person, and I'm like, I don't know if I should fight this person or not, or if I should just take him down. but I tried presenting offerings of like things that I had, and it didn't do anything. So then my other playthrough, I've actually like just took him down and just killed him. But there was something about it that I felt like I don't think I should have done that. I think I should just left him alone. Like if that was me and I'm just like going through this journey by myself, and then someone comes up, with a weapon, and I'm exhausted and I can't fight them, and they just take me down, I'd just be like, damn. I'm like, I can't. What else? You get to take everything away from me. It's like I can't win. So. Right. I felt that, and some games actually do that. They have more subtle,
sure.
Instead of like more of a either a passive or aggressive outcome. I know that there was a game that I remember called Spec Ops: The Line that presented itself where you would have choices within the game, but it would never tell you. It would be a moral kind of thing where you would see someone being dragged, like a woman being dragged by somebody, and you can choose to intervene if you want to, or you can just let them go, and you're basically encountering this already happening. So you can choose to decide to interact if you want to. If you don't, there's an end result to what happens to that person. So you have to kind of like take that burden on, whether you want to take on every fight, or if you want to be like, well, maybe I should just pull back and just kind of move away from that. So, and when you were talking about that, about the first enemy that you encounter, I thought that was really interesting that the enemy itself sees you for the first time and has never seen a human and doesn't know what to do. And most people will just start attacking that enemy. And I took your advice, and actually I heaved my sword and I just walked by, and then all of a sudden when I jumped over the cliff, then it ran away.
Yeah.
But then other times I try to steal their shit,
right.
and then he attacked me, and I'm like, oh, that makes sense. So of course he would, because that's his stuff.
Yeah. We tried to put in all those moments that it made testing under the end like an absolute monster, because there's so many different like variants on things. But yeah, we felt that was the right experience and kind of commentary we wanted to have on an adventure game. And I think of Under the End like a Souls-like, but if I say that, then people assume all these things. Like they assume a Souls-like means stamina-based combat, role-based thing,
right?
Big bosses with huge health bars. Like, you'll notice like all the bosses in the game. Well, maybe you haven't noticed, but you don't have to fight either of those troll guys. Like you can actually steal that key from the first troll, and then you can actually just roll past the second guy. And we kind of did that as a little bit tongue in cheek, like, the biggest guys in the game, they're not like, you're not locked in a room where you have to fight them. As a kind of a nod to Dark Souls, which I actually love. It's one of my favorite series ever. But, we didn't want to copy paste Dark Souls. We wanted to kind of capture the mood and feel of a Souls game without copying the mechanics.
Right.
Especially the Yeti. The big
yes.
The deer
yes. I do. I really would. I want to ask this because we had talked about that with the second Yeti.
Please,
We'll end it with this. Yeah.
So this will be where we can be able to end it here, because I love the fact that this is even in here and we're going to even talk about this. In the game you have a second Yeti that you encounter outside, and before you even get up to the Yeti, you hear this loud roar that obviously scares the hell out of you, and then you see the deers like running away from you. You're like, oh my god, what am I going to fight? This big monster or something. The idea that you have this Yeti that has a spear in its left hand and also has a dead carcass, using it as like a whip. Where did that come from? Because I've never seen anything like that with an animal being associated with a weapon in any game that I've ever seen. It's always like they'll have a shield or a sword and they're ready for you. Where did that come from?
I actually don't know. I was thinking, because I think I read one of your, like, you guys said about some things you were interested in in the Twitter stuff. So I remember reading that. I've been thinking about that. Like, where did that come from? I honestly don't know I know that the idea, like, I came up with the idea. I don't know what honestly too, like a lot of the end of Under the End, like the last year, was pretty much a blur. But I remember that was sitting on we have an old chalkboard, like in our little hallway. I wrote like "deer as weapon" on that chalkboard. And I said to Sarah, like, we're going to make one of these guys have a deer as a weapon. And she was like, okay, whatever. That's going to be impossible to animate, but yeah, it could be cool. Yeah. And so I don't know. I just like one weekend really like put together the animations for the deer as a weapon. And we had a scene in the very first trailer where the deer like were running past you, and we didn't really know where to work that scene in because it felt a little bit like it's great in a trailer, but it didn't fit into the gameplay. So that also contributed to it. Like we wanted to have this scene where deer ran past you. We wanted to have this kind of build up to another kind of fight. And then I guess the idea was like, what if, he's out hunting this creature? Like we want to kind of tell that story. Like he's a hunter. He just happened to kill something. Maybe he would use that thing as a weapon. So it's probably like how the idea came to be. But animating that guy, like that whip kind of deer weapon was a lot of fun. And pretty hard actually too. It's like made up of a ton of different little parts. And to get him to have the right whipping. And I think our sound designer, Francesco Meglio, who did all the soundscape for Under the End, along with Johnny Nitto, who did the music. But I think Fran did a fantastic job on making it feel like he was whipping that thing on the ground and hitting you with it. And so I think that came across really well. But there's not any like, I didn't see it in a movie or read it in a book or anything. It was just kind of like one of those things that kind of happens. Actually, the den of that Yeti is in the background. It's pretty hard to see, but it's in the background. If you go all the way, if you defeat him or run by him and then go left, go past where the little shrines are and the ladder that goes down into the cave, and you go all the way to that wall where there's those two krill, and the one on the top runs away and the other guy fights you. In the background there is actually the Yeti's cave. And there's like blood on the ground, and it's kind of blurred out, but that's kind of where we imagined him coming from. And then we actually had an idea. Have you guys found the sword chain?
Yes, I did. I saw that. I didn't know what to do with that because I thought that was like maybe an enhancement on my sword.
So that makes it so you don't drop your weapon.
Oh, shit. Okay.
Oh.
Yeah. So back in the day, knights, they wouldn't often use swords, chains, but they would often like use leather straps to lash their swords to their gauntlet.
Right.
So that in a fight, they wouldn't drop their sword. And so we kind of used that as an idea. So we called it the sword chain. But in that room, there's like a bunch of bones where you actually get the sword chain.
Yes.
And up, there's like a plateau that goes up there, and you can't really get to it, but it looks like you go there.
Right.
If you could go through there, that would take you into that Yeti's den. So that is part connected. That would be all connected, but we didn't end up actually fleshing that out. But that was the idea. That's like his like kind of refuse pile. Like he like eats stuff and throws it kind of over the wall, so to speak, and it collects in the ground. And one of the things he gets maybe from catching another warrior or creature or something is this sword chain.
Wow.
Kind of reminds me of Star Wars in that sense too.
Oh yeah, like the first guy, the Hoth monster is definitely like big influence on those Yeti guys. And for a long time, we actually thought about doing like as a joke kind of gif, like lightsaber duels, like having like like two Jedis fighting, because the combat system would actually work really well for lightsaber duels.
I have the high ground.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well,
jump flips. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I know that in the cave, the first Yeti that you encounter, before you even get up to him, before you come down to where it's at, it's actually eating, and it's feasting on whatever it ate. And there's also things hanging around the actual cave too. So if you pay attention before you even encounter that, you can see all this stuff, and it's like, oh, you're jumping into their den. So now obviously it's gonna attack you because you're ruining its dinner.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's I love the fact that you even had that carcass, and also too you have it where he kind of powers it up for a second, where he smashes it on the ground and then whips it at you. I was just like, damn. I was like, this is so
very satisfying. Yeah.
This is so cool. I loved that experience, and even the very last enemy that you encounter, the one that kind of gives you a run for your money, because I had a spear, a dagger, and then I used my sword, and you could pick up another spear. I did find when you encounter that for the first time, I did notice that you have a couple seconds to actually attack the enemy before he kills that big other monster. After you actually do that, they actually do run away. Is there something else that you can be able to do after you defeat that enemy where you're at the fire, or is it just kind of like a moment where you can kind of everyone's doing the same thing and just trying to survive?
Yeah, that was the idea. So like the kind of the within the theme of you're moving through a world that is kind of like in flight and would be occurring whether you're there or not. We tried to take you basically like, so all the backstory there is like, so the forest woad kind of live in the forested areas, and they tend to be a little more peaceful and a little more at one with nature. The mountain woad are more like expansionists, so they often will like they're really mining and digging out the tunnel, and kind of like you come across the tunnel leads to that den that you ultimately fight the last fight in. So that's how they get there. And there's some, if you really pay attention, like little digging tools and like pottery and stuff along the way. And also it's caving in, so it's not a terribly good excavation job. But then also you come across throughout the game, there's these kind of statues that have like wrappings around them, and some of them have like purple wrappings with spikes coming out. Those are the mountain woad, and then the forest woad have kind of leather wrappings. They're a little more somber. And those are all, this is a lot of lore, but those guys are all from an ancient race called the Rin. And the Rin people like built most of the architecture that you start the game in, all the mechanical lifts that you move through, all the doors and keys. And then a lot of the religious artifacts or spiritual artifacts that are throughout the journey are artifacts of the Rin society. But anyway, the Mountain Woad kind of really want to find more of these artifacts. Mm-hmm. So they find this site, and you actually fight. I don't know if you remember, where you come up it's all purple kind of nighttime. You come up the hill, yeah. And then the leader guy like points at you, and then the guy with the spear comes in, and you kind of fight him.
Right.
Like that site is kind of half finished. Like the wrap is kind of flapping in the wind, and they were starting to excavate and kind of repurpose all that for their religious ceremonies and beliefs. They find this old den, break into it, and in that den are the last of the Kentori, these creatures that are kind of these bear-like creatures. And so you come across a scene a little bit earlier where the one guy that throws the spears kills the last male Kentori.
Yes.
And the female's watching on the cliff, and she runs away to get back to her cubs. Right. And then it's really her trying to protect her cubs at the end. That's why she doesn't help you. She just goes back and she sits with her cubs, and then when you come in, she roars at you in a way of saying, like, thank you, but I still don't know who the hell you are, right. So please get out of here. Yeah, you can use my fire, but like, that's kind of as far as she's willing to go. So to us, that made sense in kind of like the overall theme of like, you're not the hero, you're the intruder, the world's kind of going on without you. But that was kind of the backstory of all that. The Mountain Woods are these expansionists. They kind of broke into this area, and now they're fighting against these Kentori, and you happen to be kind of in the midst of that. And then you can make a decision. You can run away and leave. You can choose to save them. But like kind of like in life, you don't always get like a reward for saving people. Sometimes the saving is the reward, and that's all you get.
Wow. Mm-hmm. And that's really like why we really were very excited to be able to have you on the podcast, because expanding on those ideas with the characters and just the world that you and Sarah had envisioned and created, and it's such a elaborate backstory. It's not just like, oh, here's the enemy and this is what they're doing. It's you created a whole world within that, and yeah, you're right. They would be still doing the same thing whether you intruded or not. And you just so happen to fall into their world, and you didn't mean to do that. And that's what this is where it all comes about. So I loved hearing all these expanded ideas, and especially with what you were wanting to put into the game, and things that are subtle that you didn't notice, but if you pay attention, those are like the things that if you pay attention in the games, they're there. And right. It's a subtle amount of things that are kind of teaching you about the actual world, and you learn more about it. But it also teaches you that without having to have an actual formal language. Like the language is totally different, and I would imagine it's some sort of, maybe it brings off of like something that's actually real, but it doesn't. At that point, it doesn't really matter, because you're experiencing all these things, and you know what it is. It's the game is showing you all these things, and it's presenting it where it all blends itself together, and it's believable. That's really what I come down to with the game. It sounds very believable in what you're doing, and it was so fun to be able to hear all those things. It's so awesome.
Well, I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I appreciate you. Yeah.
I know that time is a little bit, we've kind of gone over a little bit, but is there anything else that you wanted to kind of maybe talk about with the game? Is there? I mentioned before about some of the interviews that you've done. I know that there was one interview that you did in 2019, and I think it was at one of the it was in a game expo. I saw like they showed some actual videos of the game. Is there? It seemed like there was other parts of the game that are not in the actual final level. Was that the dream sequence that you were talking about? Because I had seen some scenes in that game with the clips that they were showing that seemed to be maybe not in the end result. Was that kind of when you were finishing the game where you had to like kind of pull some stuff out?
Yeah, there's one scene that was in our EGX trailer, which shows the father in silhouette against kind of like a sunrise
Yes.
yellow backdrop.
Yes.
Yeah, so that was a dream sequence that we ended
Oh.
up removing. And
Okay.
then our 2017 trailer has some scenes that have kind of like evolved. It's interesting whenever you talk to other devs about making trailers, that trailers become these things that you kind of have to like live up to and finish all the bits that you kind of half finished when you first made the trailer.
Oh yeah.
And so definitely, there's that's sometimes why you only see trailers for games, a couple months before they're finished, because otherwise, you can kind of disappoint because you set expectations that certain things are going to be in there and then they're not.
Right.
But a lot of the scenes in that old trailer, yeah, they just evolved. Like the 2017 trailer just kind of evolved and as the story kind of got refined. But yeah, that one yellow kind of silhouetted scene, we were very keen on that, and that was kind of an inspiration for some of the other dream kind of memory sequences. But ultimately, we decided to remove it, for the betterment of the game, just so the game's tighter and we can focus more on the things that were in there rather than just adding new stuff. So
Right. Okay. Well, that's great. I Rob and I really do appreciate you taking the time to be able to just expand further into the game, and especially making something like this. We just have a lot of more of where these things came from, and the fact that you have a lot of your passion for games, so these kind of older nostalgic type of games, so more retro type of games that are a little bit more difficult, but you have to learn on how to play the game. I think that really illustrates what you and your wife have been able to accomplish with this. And it is a challenging game. Sure. It's not a hard game to be hard, but it's if you pay attention, and I think because you're creating something with that combat, which a lot of games they don't have, and you're basically creating a new mechanic that people have never seen before, and you're teaching them while they're actually playing the game. So I think doing that, it was a challenge, but I mean, look at what happens. I mean, you see the result of it. You see how people really do respond to it.
Right. Yeah. I really appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun chatting, guys. I mean, that's what we tried to do. It's, we tried to take something, a fresh experience, something we'd like to play, but something that we felt, a lot of other players would really enjoy. And to be, really honest, something we hope to see more of. I don't know if you guys have played Below or Rain World, but those are two other games that kind of take a similar approach to Under the End in that they don't hold your hand. They introduce a different kind of take on maybe not a well-worn genre, but definitely an established kind of genre. And those are two of my favorite games, of all time. Not only in recent years but ever. And I want more of them. Selfishly, I want more of them, and I would love for AAA studios to crank out. I know we got to end, but so for me, Dark Souls 1, Dark Souls 2, Demon Souls, Bloodborne, I think hit a really sweet spot of AAA production, but kind of let you figure stuff out on your own. The Sekiro, I think, is a great combat system, but I could kind of feel the Activision fingerprints all over it. There's a lot of skill trees, and there's a lot of pop-ups, and there's a lot of here you can do this and you can do that, and I almost was I don't know, man. I don't want all that. Just give me back. Let me figure it out. Let me be lost for a bit. Let me feel that kind of magic. And I hope we see that in Elden Ring or whatever the next one's called. I hope we see more of the kind of old Dark Souls, not more of the everything is polished and everything's safe kind of Souls experience. So
right.
Yeah, and that's the thing is I've been relatively recent to that whole Soulsborne genre. I think the first one I really started getting into was Bloodborne, and it whooped my ass. I got through a few bosses on my own, and then I was and I fell off from there. But then when I got my PS5, I got Demon Souls. And I was it's the first game where I just got really sucked into. I'm going through my third or fourth playthrough, and then I have a secondary character. I'm trying to platinum the game, so I'm kind of going through that journey on and off from time to time. But Demon Souls is one of the ones that really sucked me in, and I will definitely go back to Bloodborne and try to, beat that game as well. But I'm definitely looking forward to Elden Ring. I still got midway through Dark Souls 3 remastered, so I've been kind of bouncing back all of these types of games. But once I got hooked, man, it's one of those things where it's so satisfying, the combat, and it's similar to your game as well, where it's just once you get it, you kind of get it, and it respects the player in a sense, because like we were talking about, it's not difficult for the sake of being difficult.
Yeah.
There are tells. There are things that you have to do in order to defeat this enemy. And if you don't do them, you're going to die. But if you keep repeating your mistakes, you got to learn from your mistakes to get over it. So that's
absolutely.
the thing.
No, absolutely. Well, for me, once I got into Dark Souls, it's hard for me to play other similar games. Like Witcher is a great game for all sorts of reasons, right? But like for me, like it's harder for me to enjoy now that I kind of know how Dark Souls combat feels. Like if that makes sense, I don't know.
Right.
It's different.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, it does change the way you actually play most games, because you're just like, oh, I'm so used to this, and it's,
Right.
if for a game, for especially like Bloodborne, for that game to be so confident to be in the very beginning to kill you, and that's part of the game.
Yeah.
For you to encounter the first enemy
yeah.
and for you to die, you're supposed to die.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, what a weird way to be able to see that, because they had such confidence in what they were building. They're like, hey, we're going to kill the player in the very beginning, and they're going to have to choose if they're going to want to continue playing this game, because we're going to introduce all these things to you, and you get bombarded. You have to do so many things with this and just be a one single character against everything.
Yeah.
And with like Unto the End, you're in the same situation. You're all by yourself, and I think it is a great way to not to have that restriction, to not have the dog in there, because when you had mentioned that, I was like, it would lose some of that. It would be just your companion, you and your dog companion. You would lose that element, and the player would forget about, oh, that's right, he's lost with his trying to get back to his family. Like, you would lose that, because it would be about the journey. And it's like, oh, well, what can the dog do? Can the dog can the animal attack the enemies or things like that? It would lose that element. And when it's all boiled down to just one person, I think that's where you can get more of those intimate moments with the character and with the enemies. You're deciding who's going to win or not. You have this chance of, you're going to lose, it's going to win. And even too, when some of them, when they win, they actually kind of like have like a little victory thing where they put their sword down and like smash it on the ground. I was like, oh, okay, you're gonna mock me while I die. I was like, okay. I remember some games did that. Like, there's one game called Shadows of Mordor. They created a nemesis system where if the enemy killed you, it would remember you. And I did the same thing with this one. I'm like, oh, I remember you mocked me. I'm gonna make sure I'm gonna take you down first.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That actually is heavily inspired by Punch-Out. Like, Bald Bull especially would like laugh at you after you beat you. And it would drive me friggin' nuts, because you so want to beat that guy. And it gives them a lot of personality. It changes them. We felt like, from just being a bunch of pixels and like a set of patterns to actually feeling like a personal kind of like connection. Like, I want to beat this thing, this creature that like is mocking me. So I'm really happy to hear that landed.
Yeah, we're excited for the two of you, for your journey of any other projects that you're going on to, any other ideas that you're doing into. We will still keep in contact with you through Twitter. I know that Rob and I are going to be streaming, and that's one of the games that we do actually want to stream. So we'll always keep in contact through Twitter, and we just like to thank you for all this time. And I know that we've mentioned this before, but it's just like, it's so gratifying to hear the background of like all the things that came about, where ideas came and some didn't, and it's just all that story that you wouldn't get with the actually just playing the game, because you have all that insight of the characters and like the motivation of what they are. I think that's such a great thing, and this is the main reason why we wanted this podcast to create, is to kind of get those moments, because it can get lost very quickly. People can be very passive towards the game and be like, it's too hard, I'm gonna move on, I'm not gonna play it. But it's like, if you take the time and play it, it's a great journey, and there's different endings to it, and it's like those things you don't know until you actually play the game. So it's been such a great time being able to talk to you. And if we have time, like later down the line, if you have other time, we definitely would love to have you. And I know that Sarah's a part of this as well, and if Sarah's if you and your wife would love to be able to, both you guys come back on, or if it's just you, we really do appreciate the time. And it's I know that your time is valuable, and it's such a great time that we had.
Well, thanks a lot, guys. I honestly appreciate you saying that. I had a lot of fun. I love chatting about games in general. Just appreciate the interest, and hope it was just great chatting. Yeah, absolutely. I loved it, and we'd love to come back another time if that makes sense. Absolutely.
Perfect. Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate your time, and yeah, thanks, guys.
Thank you so much.
Awesome.
All right.
All right.
Bye.
Peace.
Take it easy.